Hey everybody, and welcome to this webinar all about how to explode your brand utilizing the power of audio. Super excited to be here. My name is James Burt. We will get to the good stuff. We're not just going to have fluff and chat. I know that's what HelpBnk is all about, helping small businesses and entrepreneurs to take their stuff to the next level. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for tuning in, whether you're watching this live or you're watching the replay. Either way, I appreciate your time and attention. I'm going to make sure that I give you maximum value that I can in the next 30-ish minutes. This is a presentation that normally takes 90 minutes to give, by the way. So I'm going to have to talk 3 times quicker than I normally do. So bear with me. If you've got questions and queries, if you can stick them into the chat and I will cover them off at the end. As long as you guys can hear, can everyone just say hello in the chat just so I can make sure that people are hearing me loud and clear. You can see me. I don't know why I went for this shirt and background combo today. Seems like a terrible idea, frankly, but there we go. Everybody can hear. Fantastic. Great stuff. Right. Let us crack on then, my friends. And as I say, any questions or queries, stick them in the chat and I'll go through as many as I can at the end. So first questions first. What is a podcast? Now, back in the day, a podcast was defined as an audio file which is made available for internet downloading at a different time. But effectively now, an audio, the way that I look at it, a podcast now is not just a piece of audio. It's a show. It can be a video. You can get blogs from it. You can create loads of stuff. So a podcast, think of it like a show. It's not just a piece of audio these days. Now, why is this exciting? Especially if you're in the UK, I appreciate that we might have a global audience today, but if we're just looking at the UK, so the listener numbers from the last time around that they looked, about 19% of people listen to a podcast every single week, which has grown quite a lot. It's a 15% growth in the last 12 months alone. So podcast is exploding. I should have had a sound effect here, shouldn't I? That would have been good. But it's exploding slowly. And I think that's really important. Whereas you get, Threads has got to 100 million users in 5 days. And now apparently nobody's using Threads and people go on to like Vine or they go on to Snapchat and then they stop using those apps. I think the fact that podcasting is growing slowly over time shows it's going to be a medium that's there for a while. People think that it's, in fact, we'll go through the history very, very briefly, guys. People think that podcasting is brand new. It's actually not. It's been around since 2003. So it's actually just literally last month gone over 20 years old. But it's been steadily growing over that period of time. And it's going to effectively what radio used to be to our mums and dads and grandparents. Podcasting, I think, is going to take that place for us sort of modern day people. And the audience is growing. There's now 4 million shows that have ever been created in podcasting. Now, that might sound like a lot of shows, right? And I get, you might hear that stat and go, bloody hell, how do I compete with 4 million other people? Well, you don't really have to. That's 4 million shows that have ever been created. And even if you did say it's 4 million, right? If you said it's 4 million as of right now, if you think about it, there's, I think, 70 million Facebook just fan pages. There's 700 million people who use LinkedIn. There's over 1 billion YouTube accounts, for example. So just on a basic sort of competitive analysis, where would you prefer to compete for attention? Where there's 4 million people, 700 million people, or 1 billion people? I think the answer becomes abundantly clear. Now, obviously, you can utilize other platforms as well. What I'm not saying is stop doing your social media and just do a podcast. Absolutely don't do that. You should be using your social media to amplify your podcast effectively. But it just goes to show how new this is, because I know that the narrative around at the moment is very much, well, everybody's got a podcast. It's just not true. It might feel like it. And for us business owners, entrepreneurs, whether you're at the startup or the scale up phase, if you're content creators, you might think that everybody's got a podcast because that's the space that we're in. You've got something called your reticular activation system. I won't get into the neuroscience of it too much, but effectively you see more of what you look for. So for example, if you buy a blue Volkswagen Golf, every other car that you'll see will be a blue Volkswagen Golf all of a sudden. Those same amount of cars have been there before, but now you're just aware of them. And that's the same with podcasting. So that's when you think everybody's got a show, but they actually haven't. As of, again, to show the growth of shows in January 2020, which is about halfway through my podcasting journey, there was 900,000 active shows. And again, if you go to October 2022, when the last stats were done, that's jumped up to 4 million active shows. So the question becomes, has the bubble burst? And if it had, this would be the worst webinar of all time and the shortest webinar of all time. But luckily, the answer is no. And here's why. Because last month, for example, I mentioned earlier that 90% of people have listened on a weekly basis. But last month, only 41% of people have listened to a show in the last month. So that means we've still got the other half of the UK population to go and get. And these are not regular listeners. They've just happened to have listened in the last month, by the way. And the other point of it is, that it's such a valuable audience that it's just going to start getting more and more attention as more business owners, entrepreneurs, and content creators realize how valuable this platform actually is. And there's a couple of reasons why. It's not just the increasing volume of listeners that makes it super valuable. It's actually who the listening audience actually is. The audience demographic makes it super valuable. Now, again, I'm not going to go too far into the sort of the psychology of marketing, but here's a couple of reasons of why podcasting is powerful for brands. It's an ABC1 demographic. So ABC1 in a marketing sphere effectively means that they're affluent, they're educated, and they've got disposable income. So these are, if you're trying to sell a hefty price product, a high ticket item, this is the demographic by and large you're going to want to go after. So they're ABC1, 80% of the audience is ABC1. They are affluent, they're educated, and they've got disposable income. That's reason number one. It's a slightly male biased audience as well. And you might think, well, why is that useful? Well, it's actually the counter opposite to traditional media. So traditionally, magazines, radio, TV has been more female weighted in terms of an audience demographic, and podcast is more slightly male. Now, it was when I first started, it was like 60-40. It's now evened itself out. I think at the last count, it was like 52-48. So there's not much in it, but it's still ever so slightly male focused and male biased. 37% of the people who listen to podcasts fall into that 15 to 34 age range. So again, if you've got a product you're trying to get to a younger demographic, they're traditionally very, very hard to get to, but lots of them are now starting to listen to podcasts, especially on Spotify. There's a lot of people who are listening to, a lot of younger audience who are listening to content on Spotify. As I mentioned, it's almost the opposite of existing traditional media, such as radio. Now, why do I keep banging on about this existing media? Because this is potentially what you've got in your hands now. So back in the day, my dream was to be a radio presenter. I actually ended up being a radio presenter for a short period of time before the ex-head of Radio 1 sacked me. But that's a story for another day. We haven't got time for that. We've only got 30 minutes. But the point I'm trying to make is that when I was starting up on my radio journey, you had to get the buy-in from a program controller or a station manager. They were kind of the gatekeepers of whether you could get your voice heard. Could you get your message out there to the marketplace? With podcasting, the control's in your hands. The content creators have now got all of the control, which I think is amazingly exciting. And whether you're somebody who runs a brick and mortar business, or you're just a content creator who's making content to explode your own brand, or whether you're an influencer, whatever it may be, you are now in control. The way that you used to have to try and get onto the radio is now gone. You control it. And with podcasting, it's like the ability to communicate, mass communication all at the same time, but you control the narrative, which is so powerful. There's also podcasts, there's a powerful multiplier effect. So 48% of people have listened to a podcast via YouTube. So whilst people have traditionally thought that podcasting was just a piece of audio, nearly half of the audience now has consumed at some point, not regularly, but at some point has consumed content via YouTube. So you can effectively, and Brendan Burchard talks about this, it's called circular virality. You can start moving people around your content types. So with your podcast, you could promote your YouTube could promote your LinkedIn could promote your TikTok could promote your Instagram. You can start moving people around your content cycle and make them see more of your content. Why else is it powerful for brands? Well, it's a proactively niche audience. You might be sitting here going, well, I'm a super, super niche business. I don't think that there's a space for me, but actually it's very, very proactively niche. And I'll talk about that in a second. It's an engaged audience. So if people are a podcast fan, they will listen to 80% of a show. So let's say you put out an hour's worth of content. The stats show that 80% of those people will listen to 75% or more of that show. Huge engagement levels. Do you think that drop off online is about 4 seconds? You can hold people's attention for an hour with a podcast. It's amazing. As I mentioned before, it's a strong socio-demographic. It's also a content hungry audience. So if somebody class themselves as a podcast fan, they'll listen to an average of 6 shows per week. So you can nearly get your ideal audience, presuming that that's who is your listener, on a daily basis. Now, what I'm not saying is that, hey, if you do 6 shows a week or 7 shows a week, someone will turn up every single day, but a percentage would potentially. And so they're a super content hungry audience. And as we mentioned earlier, it's a growing audience. Again, super apologies for the speed I'm talking at. This is normally a 90-minute presentation. I'm trying to condense it down into 30 seconds. Maybe you can watch it again on a replay somewhere on the HelpBnk website and turn me down by 0.5% or something like that. But I mentioned a minute ago, it was niche. And again, I want to really sort of drill this point home. Here's the categories. So these are the top line categories of the podcasting platforms. You've got everything from news, comedy, sport, right down to government, health and fitness. There's a few more here, kids and leisure, TV and film. So chances are within those top line categories, your business will fit or your content will fit into one of those categories. But also, as well as the top line categories, you've also got subcategories. So within business, for example, you've got entrepreneurship, management, not-for-profit, careers, and marketing. So you can even put your content into subcategories of top line categories so you can get found by the audience that's really, really after that kind of content. Super powerful. But I suppose we still have not addressed the elephant in the room, because earlier I mentioned that there's 4 million shows that have ever been created. And although I tried to justify it, there'll be a few of you sitting there going, that's still a lot of people. How do you compete with 4 million other podcasters? Well, the answer is you actually don't have to. So this is the total number. I took a screenshot of this on a platform the other day. So there's just been over 4 million shows that have ever been created. But here's the interesting thing. In the last 30 days, which we zoom into here, just under 380,000 have actually put out a show in the last month. So of the 4 million podcasts that have ever existed, less than 8% have actually put out a show in the last month. So again, when you're now looking at where do you compete for attention, 70 million Facebook fan pages, 700 million LinkedIn users, whether it be a billion YouTube accounts, or where you get the attention of 380,000, that's where you're competing. 380,000 or a billion. Like, where would you prefer to put your content to give yourself the best opportunity to get found? Still sounds like a lot of shows though, right? But when you consider there are 400 million monthly podcast listens globally. So again, let's just look back at that. 380,000 shows are competing for 400 million monthly podcast listens. So what would that be worth to your brand and your business? If all things were equal, and obviously they're not all equal, but it works out, because I've already done the maths for you guys, because I'm like Carol Vorderman, it's about 1,100 listeners per show. Now, again, some people will be sitting there going, well, I've got, 200,000 Instagram followers and I've got 17,000 people who follow me on LinkedIn. But what an engaged audience who would listen for potentially like an hour's worth of your content every single week, if you put it out on a weekly basis, which is what you should be doing, by the way. We'll touch on that later. How valuable would that actually be to your business? If you're doing paid for media, what would you be paying if you could put your message in front of your ideal audience and have them pay attention to you for 60 minutes? Hugely valuable, hugely, hugely valuable. Brands are doing this right now, by the way. And they're really starting to get switched onto it. So it shows that if brands like this are making it work, you probably should be within your business as well. Again, any questions or queries, at the end, I'm going to try and do a quick Q&A session. So feel free, stick your questions in the chat. And if I can, I'll get to them at the end. So are we sold on the concept of podcasting now? 380,000 people to compete with versus 400 million potential podcast listeners. You can create content in multiple niches and you can create it as often as you want. Give me a yes in the chat if you're now sold on the concept of a podcast and you want to do one of these damn things. Yes. Emma P is saying yes. Simon's saying yes. Barbara's saying yes. Okay, 3 out of 40. That's good. We've got a Tess. A hell yeah. Oh, come on now. I like a hell yeah. Great stuff. Brilliant. Thank you for your engagement, guys. Again, apologies for how fast I'm having to talk. Got 30 minutes. Right, good. Let's go. So first things first, and this is sort of getting into the tactical and the practical bits of it. So what's your podcast actually going to say about you, right? What is your podcast going to say? This has got to be an extension of your brand. Now, for some people who work in brand marketing, if you're a full-time content creator, whatever it may be, you might be going, well, that's obvious, isn't it, James? And it kind of is obvious, but you'll be amazed at how many people will make a podcast that's got no real alignment to their overall brand. So it should be, with your podcast, I should get the same look, feel, sense of your, I guess it's a bit esoteric, but I should get the same feel from your brand if I found you on Insta or Facebook or YouTube or TikTok as I would from your podcast. It needs to have a correlation. There needs to be that brand tone of voice needs to be carried through. Some show considerations before you even get started. So here's the 4 main considerations to get started with a show. And even if you have got a show, because I appreciate some people might already have experience in the podcasting space, just think about this for your existing content. So first and foremost is format. First and foremost is format, should I say. So format, back in the day when I got started in 2017. Oh, by the way, why should you listen to me about this? Well, I've launched 173 shows as of now. I'm not saying that as a big brag. I've just been around a long time doing it since 2017. I accidentally learned this stuff. Having been sacked by the head of Radio 1, I was really annoyed. And I was like, hey, podcasts are cool because they're like the radio, but you can't get sacked. I will do one of those. And back when I started in 2017, there wasn't the amount of information there is out there now. So I read a load of blogs, watched a load of videos, listened to a load of podcasts about how to do it. And I'd worked with big brands before, like Nando's, Nintendo, Thomas Cook, Xbox. So I sort of treated the launch of the podcast like a brand client, like I would have done back in my PR days. And I accidentally ended up with the second biggest business podcast in 2017. Tim Ferriss was number 1. Gary Vee was number 3, and there was me with absolutely no profile or nothing sat in between them, like the meat of an influencer sandwich at number 2. And everyone said, how did you do that? The truth was, I didn't really know what had worked. I just knew that something had. But as any good marketeer knows, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So I just told people I've got some systems and processes. I had a format. I did a 14-day launch process, which we'll touch on if I've got time later. And yeah, fast forward to now, we've done 173 launches as of yesterday. Our 173rd went live yesterday. So that's why I've got a few bits and pieces that might be useful for you. So format, back in the day when I started in 2017, the format of a podcast really was me and you via Zoom or face-to-face. It was one-to-one effectively. It was just a conversation. That was the only format. But nowadays, it's become really broad. You know, let's say, for example, I was talking to some universities yesterday about podcasting. I was like, imagine all of your professors or your lecturers. You could do like a peer-to-peer round table, you know, have 4 people around the table. You could do a live panel and you could take the audio from that live panel. You could turn that into a podcast. If you're a coach, mentor, expert, consultant, who does discovery calls, have we got give me a 1 in the chat if you are somebody makes your money in the expert economy. So if you're a coach, consultant, mentor, expert, you basically get paid by clients for your expertise. Give us a 1 if there's any of those in the chat. That'd be really useful to know. Looks like there isn't any. Okay, fine. But if you were, and if you have a business where you have to do discovery calls potentially, you can kind of get rid of discovery calls and do a podcast instead. I don't know if you guys have had this, right? You've got them clients that you just can't get them off the fence. They want to do it, but they haven't got the budget. Oh, we're going to do it in Q4. You know, when they're like in the beginning of the year, we're thinking of a Q4. It's a Q4 activity for us. You know, those people, but they still want to get you on the phone all the time, or they want to do another flipping Zoom call. Well, you could say to them, hey, look, I understand that you're not ready to commit fully to the coaching yet. And, you know, I'd love to give you as much support as I can preemptively before that. But what would be really useful, your challenge might feel like it's unique to you, but actually there's loads of people within my community who have the same challenge, the same problem. So I'd love to jump on a call with you, but here's the deal. I'd love to record it as a podcast episode. So instead of me just helping, I'd love to help you one-to-one, but also vicariously, we can help people one-to-mass or one-to-many. How does that sound to you? And then you can get rid of the need of a discovery call, and effectively a sales call becomes a piece of content. And also from that regard, you know, there's a difference between, as your marketing goes out telling people, hey, use us, we're brilliant, use us, we're brilliant. And there's a difference between that and other people come to that realization. So if the format of your show, let's say, for example, you do it like a coaching session. I've got a mate of mine, James Sinclair, does it really successfully. He hasn't got time for one-to-one consultancy. He just doesn't like doing that as a format, but he shows his expertise, which means that people attend his events and consume his content because vicariously he's giving them information. So instead of him saying I'm brilliant, people are working it out for themselves. So the format can be multifaceted these days. It doesn't need to be just what a one-to-one interview. You can also do it remotely. There's some great platforms you could do it remotely, you know, via, you know, a platform like Riverside, for example, which is kind of like Zoom, but less bad quality, because Zoom's great for sort of these sort of webinars and this sort of information, but it's not great for video and it's not great for audio. So Riverside's a good option. So you can do it remotely or you can do it in person. Format of it doesn't really matter too much. Frequency. How often should you put your podcast out? I used to give people the option. I now don't. It's weekly. Ideally, to get maximum reach for your podcast, you need to be putting it out weekly. Now, if you can't commit to putting a show out every single week for perpetuity, i.e. until the end of time, I fully appreciate that. So what you might want to look at is doing a season or a series. And you can batch record a load of content in advance. I say the minimum you need to do is 6 episodes. And it could be up to, you know, like 30, 40 episodes. We have some clients who will do like a 50 episode series and then they'll have a couple of weeks break and then they'll come back with a different content type. But every single week while you're in series or in season, you want it to be going out weekly. I had a call yesterday with a university. They're doing brilliantly. They're already doing great numbers. They only put the show out monthly. They're like, how can we improve? I was like, just do more of them. And their problem was that it had been sort of quite complicated within the production. I was like, look, simplify it and get more of those shows out because you're going to get more than just sort of multiples of the same listeners listening. You will get more new listeners if you're putting out content more regularly. So ideally, weekly is best place. Fortnightly, if you absolutely have to. But I would say, honestly, if you can't commit to doing it at least weekly, fortnightly, just don't start. And that's not me sort of like being rude to anybody. But if you can't start, as I say, batch record it so that you've got a load of content up front that you can then put out over a period of time. You'll get more from it, I promise you. Length. How long should a podcast be? Sounds facetious, but as long as it's interesting. I've done interviews with podcasts. After 28 minutes, it was done. And I've also spoken to somebody who was the youngest ever youngest ever CEO of a publicly listed company. And 2.5 hours later, we were still talking. And I was like, wow. Now, 2.5 hours might be a little bit long, but the conversation, I found it interesting. I think the listening audience that I've got would find it interesting as well. But it should be as long as it's interesting. However, That said, attention spans, even on podcasting, are getting shorter. So 30 to 45 minutes is a real sweet spot. And if you're doing solo content, between sort of 15 and 30 minutes works quite nicely. So if you're going to do a show by yourself without a guest, 15 to 30 minutes. But really, yeah, 30 to 45 is that sweet spot. And guests, this is the other thing that I get asked about all the time when people are starting out podcasts, like, how important are the guests? It is important to a certain extent, but equally it's more about what's in it for the listening audience. Now, what people generally think with guests is that, oh, if I get a big hitter on, if I get a big celebrity on, I'm going to get loads and loads of downloads and listens. Now, of course, you want that to an extent, but you should be having the guest on because it's going to be brilliant content. And if they share it out, that's a bonus. You're not doing it just because of the audience reach that they've got ultimately. But I would say, especially if you're starting out, go to friendlies. I call them friendlies. So anyone that you know really well, because to start with an interview, you need to know a bit about their journey, their passions, their backstory. You need to know where you're trying to take the narrative of that conversation. If it's someone that you already know, it makes it a lot easier rather than having to, because when you're doing a podcast episode, and you'll find this, if you haven't done one yet, the first time you do it, it is like trying to drink from a fire hydrant. Honestly, it's proper overwhelming. It's because you're actively listening. So you're listening to what the person's saying, but also in your head, you're going, oh, that was really interesting. How can I link that into the thing that I want to say next? So you're actually talking to yourself while they're talking to you. You try to listen to two things. It's really, really hard work. So if you've got a friendly or someone that you know well to start with, you're not having to think about, oh, what happened in their journey next, because you already know it, if that makes sense. And friendlies are more likely to say yes to start with, which can get you up and running, get you moving. My whole thing with podcast is start as simply and easily as you can, and add layers of complexity as and when you need it moving forwards. Setup of a show. Right, there's a couple of key considerations here. There's only a couple of places to get found. If you go onto your podcast app of choice, whether it be Apple or Spotify, effectively, if you go onto here, I'll show you on my screen there. There's only a couple of places to get found. So normally it'll be you type search, or normally a lot of people just sort of scroll through and they'll see what sort of tickles their fancy in terms of the artwork. So the show name, as the name that you're going to search for, has to do a few key things. So firstly, your show name. Is it unique? Does it do what it says on the tin? I say it should be like Ronzil, do exactly what it says on the tin. Is it SEO friendly? So there's no search terms or no alternative spellings or numerics. So i.e. like branding for you with the number 4 might not be a good name. Are the URLs available? That doesn't have to be. Now, you might be doing it as an extension of your business. So you might just have businessname.com/podcast as a landing page, but I'm always trying to future proof. So let's say, for example, a show blows up and does really, really well for you. You want to make sure that maybe the URLs are available, maybe the social media handles and stuff. It's just considerations to think about. Is it easy to spell, and does it resonate with the target market? It sounds really, really obvious stuff, but you'd be amazed at how many times people disregard that. So for example, I've got a podcast. Go and check it out. You might like it. It's called Building the Brand. And that that show name there, Building the Brand, you kind of know what you're going to get. It's going to be about branding. It's going to be about businesses that are growing or they're building. If I called this the show the James Burt Podcast, as much as my ego hates to admit this, no one's really going to care. No one's going to care. Whereas a show about branding, and branding has also got a key SEO search friendly term in there. So brand or branding, I make sure that I pack that into the show notes and put as many keywords into that show as I can. And I include that within the show name. So the second consideration I mentioned is the artwork. Again, it's got to do quite a lot, this little podcast. If you look at the top of your screen, this is the Apple pages, the artwork's quite big. But as you scroll down, when you get to like the charts, for example, the images get tiny. So you really have got to not overwhelm the audience. Don't have too much wording on it. It's just got to be clear and concise, easy to read, instantly communicate the identity of the show, grab attention, stand out, and resonate with the target market. And when you're doing it, it has got to be exactly square. So it's got to be 1400 by 1400 pixels as a minimum, or 3000 by 3000 as a maximum. Something that the design geeks amongst you might like to know about. When I first heard about it, I was like, I don't know what it means. And my graphic designer was like, don't worry, I've got you. So it's got to be exactly square, or else it won't upload to all the platforms correctly. By the way, podcasting is not for everybody, right? It's not for everyone. Its audience is exploding. There's people who listen to lots of content, an average of 6 or 7 shows per week. People are most likely to listen at times when no other media can reach them. So, for example, you get really interesting times like when people are out pushing a buggy around, or they're doing the commute, or they're doing the ironing, or they're in the gym. That you can reach people or they're in the car driving. So you can actually, with a podcast, you can reach them at times where no other medium can get to them. So again, I think that's another superhero secret power of podcasting, is that it's not just fighting for other attention. It's getting to people when they're not distracted by other stuff. You know, how many people sit watching the TV, but they're also on TikTok, or you walk to go and make a cup of tea and you get lost down the rabbit hole, or you end up on TikTok watching Simon Squibb's videos because you want to find out who's got a dream. Like, I love that stuff, but it loses me. I get lost in the vortex. But podcasting gets to people when those distractions can't happen. You know, people can't be watching a video in the car, but you'd hope. Again, the audience is super valuable when you can't reach them by other forms of media. It's also really a powerful CTA medium, a call to action medium. So you can put clickable links in the show notes, which you could track, so you can actually see where your traffic's going. But people will click a link when instructed to do so. There's some stats that came out last year that said 56% of people will click a link when told to do so. Now, I think that's a bit high, personally, but this was a survey of 2,000 people, so who am I to quibble? But it's a very good call to action medium in terms of driving direct traffic to a direct place. 56% of people will click a link when told to do so. Comparatively there, by the way, 56%, and let's say even, you know, it's half of that. It's a quarter of that. Let's say it's 10% of people will click a link when told to do so by the show host. The online industry average is 4%. So again, you're getting to people when they're not distracted by other stuff, and they're more likely, 14 times more likely or something. There you go, 14 times more likely to click a call to action. The same call to action that you might have on your LinkedIn post or your Facebook or whatever. So whilst it's not for everybody, it is for you if you want to create expert positioning in the marketplace. It's amazingly powerful for being the expert authority in your space and in your sector. It's really, really powerful for that. If you want to be recognized as a thought leader in your space, it's a great way. Again, would you, if you did an amazing post on LinkedIn, which you can't even do because of the character sort of restrictions that you've got, but let's say you did a LinkedIn article, would somebody sit and read your article for 20 minutes and hear about, your thoughts and philosophies on business and life? Probably not. But while they're out walking the dog or while they're in the car, they might. So it's brilliant for being recognized as a thought leader in your space. Great for a way for your brand to generate you revenue. You can monetize a podcast from day one. There's multiple ways to do that. It's great if you want to be considered an influencer or an authority, because it's more difficult than, just flipping your camera and doing a selfie or doing a story or whatever. There's that preconceived concept that actually, if you've got a podcast, you must be an influencer or an authority or an expert in your craft. It's great for generating organic traffic to your business. As I mentioned before, the CTA rate alone, driving people to your other platforms and to your business, is really powerful. What I find it good for as well is, and this was really surprising, a friend of mine called Will Polston, he's quite a well-known coach, mentor, expert, fantastic guy, multiple best-selling author and all this sort of stuff recently. And I was chatting to him because I've launched both of his podcasts for him. And I said, what would you say is the number one benefit? I was really surprised by this. What was the number one benefit of the podcast? He said, do you know what? It converts high-ticket clients who I don't know. I was like, okay, explain more. He said it's the number one platform that he's got for getting people to convert for high ticket, because they might be cold traffic to him because he doesn't know that they're there, if that makes sense, but he's not cold to them. So they're already warm traffic by the time they get there. So converting that sale, and these are big coaching programs that he's selling, it's much more easily done for people who have come warm via the podcast. Paul's business opportunities towards you. I launched a podcast, and again, I wouldn't say, how to launch £1 million business from a podcast, but I launched a podcast, and within 18 months, it created about £750,000 worth of revenue. Indirectly, by the way, because of the opportunities, the brand position that it gave us. Gets you to network with global business leaders. I've interviewed Grant Cardone, Elena Cardone, the guy who invented the trunky suitcase. I spoke on stage with Les Brown. I had no place speaking on the stage with Les Brown because he's an icon, and I'm just a mere idiot compared to him. He was an absolute legend in his space. But again, because of a podcast, I got all these leveraged opportunities, which is amazing. And it creates global attention. A podcast, you record it. I'm recording this in sunny, East London in Ilford right now. If I turn this into a podcast, I can ping it out across all the platforms and I'll get to 50 countries in, the same day. It's great for generating leads and turning fans and followers into paying clients and monetizing your content. There's loads of other stuff about setting up the equipment, the software. We're definitely not going to have time. That's bang on half an hour. Oh, the one thing that I will say, there you go. Go and connect with me. LinkedIn.com/in/James Burt, or there's a link in the chat box as well. The one thing I would say, if you haven't yet launched a podcast, when you launch with multiple shows. So of the 173 podcast launches that we've done for actors, athletes, celebrities, influencers, entrepreneurs, it's something like 98% of those launches have still end up being an iTunes top chart podcast, because we've got a strategic way of making the algorithm work in our favor. So the first show you should launch should be a pilot show. So it's intentionally short, between 3 and say 10 minutes long. And it gives people kind of a synopsis and a snippet of what the show's going to be about. So who are you? What's your credibility? What's the content about? Who's it for? What form of education, information, or entertainment are you going to give people? Why you're excited to launch it, upcoming guests, and all that kind of good stuff. You put that in the pilot show, and then you launch 2 full episodes that are going to give people a good flavor of what's to come. So, for example, if you're going to do interviews one week and then you're going to do solo stuff, or you're a coach mentor, maybe you're going to interview somebody one week and then you're going to do like a coaching session instead of a discovery call that we talked about earlier. If those 2 different formats of content, then put those in your launch shows. But again, you need those 3 launch shows. We've tested this loads of times. 3 shows work. You effectively warm up the audience for a fortnight in advance. There's a whole strategy and a tactic around it, which unfortunately, again, haven't got time to go into today, but that works really, really well. And you find that we've never paid for fake followers, fake listeners. We've never had to use budget for Facebook ads and stuff. All of the results we've got, 173 podcast launches, 90% of them hitting the charts, some of them hitting, number 1 globally around the world, has been organically driven via this 3-show launch process. If you haven't yet done a podcast, make sure you operate in that way. And if you have got a podcast and it's not getting you the results you want at the moment, then what might be worth doing, let's say you get to episode 50 or 100, maybe have a little rebrand, have a couple of weeks off, and then come back with maybe a new season or a new series. And I would launch with, here's what's coming up. So you could do like a mini pilot and then a couple of episodes. That works really well as well. Again, there was more stuff to go through, but again, within only 30 minutes, I've sort of spoke as quick as I could without it being just absolute gobbledygook. So I'm going to go through the Q&A questions now. Let me scroll back. If there's any immediate questions. Is there a way to get the slides afterwards so you'll be able to watch it again? But you know what? The setting up equipment and software is why I came. Shame we're not going to see that as part of it. Yeah, sorry, mate. I've got loads of online free stuff that you can check out. So the equipment and the software there's a range from, if you want 50 quid up to thousands of pounds, and the software and the different platforms, I've got that online. So just follow me online. I'll post random stuff, videos, explainers, and that kind of stuff, and blogs. So just follow me online. You can get that. Is engagement or listen time higher generally on listening platforms, or is video more powerful? From Curtis. That's a great question. In all honesty, it depends on the podcast. So for example, we find that engagement is much higher on the audio version than on YouTube. And that goes across all of our clients generally. But again, it depends. If you've got, say, like a Logan Paul's podcast, you get a different experience by watching it, because you can see the people collaborating, you can see the environment and all that stuff. But generally, you'll get more listen time on the audio version rather than the podcast, rather than the video version, to the point where we will get 80% of people that will finish an episode of the podcast, but only you'll get a drop off at about 10-15% on videos generally. So it's really interesting. But yeah, But what I would say as well is that you get 2 different kinds of consumers. So if you're going to do a podcast, and by the way, I think you should always be recording the video now for clips, reels, shorts, and all that kind of other good marketing assets and materials that you're going to get from it, if that makes sense. So record it as video and on audio, so you're on both platforms. Don't choose one over the other, if that makes sense. What about 3 times? So Paul has asked, what about 3 times a week in terms of how many times to put out a podcast? Paul, if you can keep it up 3 times a week, my friend, you go for it. What I generally find though, is that, like Bartlett, for example, Stephen Bartlett, Diary of a CEO, he has 2 main episodes per week, and he has like a little moment, he calls it, on a Friday. So he's putting out consistent content, because again, the algorithm will favor the amount of people that are downloading it on a consistent basis, which is why it ranks so high. But 3 times a week is a lot to put out. If you can keep it up, then great. If you can't, what I'd say is start small and grow as you go, because consistency is really key. So let's say, for example, you launch a show on Monday. Every Monday thereafter, you need to be putting a podcast out. It's got to be on the same day, same time. That's really, really key. It sounds daft, but it's really, really key. So for example, in your instance, Paul, I'll be putting out 1 show to start with. And then if it starts getting traction, if I've got the time for it, if let's say, for example, you've got a community of people and you have to do Facebook lives or community lives, or you do stage talking or whatever, anyway, as part of your offering, and you're just repurposing that content and it's easy to do, then by all means. But what I would say is also with the 3 days a week, make sure they're weekdays. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. Drop off on download numbers is about 50% on a Friday, and a Saturday and Sunday is pretty much a non-starter. It drops off a further 50%. So I'll be doing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. But again, start small and grow as you go. That'd be my tip there. Bob Allen. Hello, Bob Allen. Haven't seen you for a little while. Bob Allen, you're a legend. How are you planning? How well planned are your podcasts? Do you give your guests sight of the questions before you meet them? Bob, great question. I had this debate yesterday with somebody when I was doing some training for the Chartered Institute of Marketing. My answer is no, but I have got some clients at the moment because of the level of people that I talk to. You know, these are C-suite level executives at publicly listed companies. We've had legal departments who are now getting involved. We've had to do practice sessions for people who are recording to make sure that they like the question that they're being asked. Me personally, Bob, I think you get a more real, authentic, honest, organic. Is that the right word? Holistic? Ugh, I hate that word, holistic. But you get a more real conversation when you just have it live for the first time. I find that if the guest has been preempted on the questions, they can really tend to overthink it. Now, if you've got a standard question that you always use. So, for example, there's a great show called The School of Greatness. And he always asks at the end of the podcast, what's your definition of greatness? You might want to tell the guest that so they end the show really strong and so they can give a really succinct answer. But general questions, I wouldn't do it. I've only, in the 6 years I've been doing it, I've probably been asked less than a dozen times, I reckon, to see the questions in advance. Some people will be more comfortable if you can, but most people won't need to see those. So I would advise you not to if you can get away with it. Bob is also asking another question, as is Bob. I'll answer it as well. Equipment is one of my questions as well. Where's the best place to find all the info on your site? Go to www.phonic.media or search me out on LinkedIn or whatever, and just write gear guide. And I've actually got a list of all the gear and clickable links and stuff that you might need. So yeah, just and that goes for anyone, not just Bob. Just DM me the word wherever you can find me, gear guide, and I will send you that. It's a PDF with clickable links. So you can go and find all of the stuff. I've basically picked those stuff you can go and find on Amazon, so you can get it next day delivery and all that good stuff. How do we have to have an existing? Do we have to have an existing brand, Paul's asking, or can we just build a podcast with a specific theme, subject, with a view to growing it and monetizing it? Yeah, great question, Paul. You don't have to have a podcast. You don't have to have a brand in advance. I actually, a couple of years ago, 2017, grew a brand from a podcast. It started off literally just as a show, but it just took off like a wildfire. It really did, like globally. Got recognized. It really, really did well. And I never saw it coming, to be brutally honest. My answer prior to that would have been, no, you've got to have a brand in advance. But you can. But again, you've got to think, I always start with the end in mind. What's the outcome? Number one rule of sort of coaching or self-awareness is, what's the outcome for this? Where do you think you're going to take this? Let's say, for example, you want to grow your personal brand. Okay, cool. Well, why are you growing that personal brand? Well, I want to have more impact. Okay, cool. More impact where? Or I want to be able to coach and mentor people. Okay, cool. So you're going to push them into like a coaching program or a group. You need to know that stuff in advance. We've had a couple of clients recently. It's quite difficult to do things like theme music and artwork if there's no brand guidelines. But effectively, you could launch a podcast, which then births a brand. Most of our clients come to us the other way around. They've already got existing brands and they want to use the podcast to effectively throw fuel on the fire, get them more attention. But you absolutely can do it. Yeah. Suzette is saying, I'm a life coach. Do you have any quick tips for monetizing from day one? Yeah, I think show what you know. Instead of talking about sort of your coaching skills, show it. You know, all those people who've been sitting on the fence. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of like trickle down or sort of accidental revenue from podcasts. You might not potentially get the download numbers to go, hey, you know, BetterHelp want to sponsor my podcast, or Huel, and these are companies that we've worked with, because they'll only work with you once you got to a certain level. But for example, if there's someone, Suzette, who's been sitting on the fence, you haven't been able to get them onto one of your coaching programs, then I would offer to do a podcast with them and say, hey, you know, again, exactly as I mentioned earlier, I'd love to help you, but obviously I can't help everyone on a one-to-one basis, but your challenge, your problem, a lot of people that I speak to have got that challenge. So why don't we talk about it as a podcast, and then I can help you on a one-to-one basis, but one-to-many, I can help more people. That's how I'd be doing it. And that's how I'd monetize it from day one. Also, I mean, it can spawn events. That's another one, good one from day one. But if you're looking to like do a podcast, put it out, make cash, I would be doing it from those warm leads that you've already got who are sitting on the fence. Get them onto a discovery. It's effectively like a discovery call, and you can show how good your coaching is effectively. How do you outreach and go and get guests? Great question, Dylan. So I do it via voice notes. By the way, HelpBnk team, I don't know how long I'm supposed to chat for. I'll just keep chatting all day if I'm allowed. So if you want to, at some point, someone has to kick me off or just end this, then just let me know. Because if not, I'm just going to carry on till 1:30 if it's cool with everybody else. I hope that's okay. I don't know the rules and regulations, but if you don't ask, you don't get. How do you outreach to guests? So I've got a strategy where I actually do voice notes. It works really, really. I heard Joe Wicks talk about it on a podcast, so I did it on Joe Wicks, and it worked. And I got him secured as a guest on a podcast. So I send them a voice note, because people who have got a big following or whoever it may be, they might not click on a video if they don't know you. They might not click on an image if they don't know you, because they don't know what they're going to get. But with a voice note, you can there's a low, there's no link there. There's a low risk, if that makes sense. So I would send them a voice note. And I tell them specifically why I'm interested in them being on the show. And then I would send them the artwork after. And if I've already launched a show, if I've got it into the charts or whatever, any credibility around the show, I would then send that as an image to them. But I'd effectively go, let's say I want to reach out to you, Dylan. I'd voice note you. And again, you've only got like 60 seconds on Instagram, and you've not got very long on LinkedIn either. I'm like, hey, Dylan, it's James here. I appreciate you probably get tons and tons of messages every single day, but I would absolutely love to get you on as a guest on my podcast. So it's called Building the Brand. We've got an audience of people who listen around the world. And effectively, I love to unpick the lessons and learnings from people who are building exciting brands and businesses. We've had everyone from Joseph Valente, who won The Apprentice, right through to a couple of brand new startups who had left the army and then literally the next day created the brand. So we have a real variety of people who come onto the show. The audience tends to be younger entrepreneurs, in that startup to scale up phase. And I know from reading your blog yesterday, when you were talking about how to scale up from 1 to 2 locations, that they would get loads of value from that. So again, I appreciate you're super, super busy. If you have got any time to jump on a call to do it remotely, or I can come and do it face to face, I'd love to have a chat. And if there's anyone in your team I need to connect with, please let me know. I'll send you a couple of bits about the show so you can see it's not just some random geezer in his bedroom. Thanks for taking the time to listen. Like, that's what I'm doing. And then I'm sending them a backup of, as I say, artwork and then any credibility. So that's how I would do it. Katie says, do you think it's important to have a mic at first, or is it fine to start without? It depends on the quality you're going for, Katie. I would say yes, you do really need a mic. Even your Apple headphones, they're actually not a bad quality, but really you can get microphones on Amazon for like 30-40 quid. There's one called what's it called? A Blue Snowball, which is like 40-50 quid, a USB one that plugs straight into your computer. That's quite good. Again, you can spend hundreds on these things, but you don't have to. But I'd say, yeah, really, you should have a microphone, even if it is just the Apple headbuds to start with. Have you found it hard to build organically from zero? Would you suggest paying for promotion or exposure? No, I would not pay for Curtis. I wouldn't pay for it personally. I just hate those spammy accounts like, hey, pay us $100 and we'll get you 20,000 listeners. But what you're going to find is, and we've seen this in stats and data of other people that have done it, is that you're just going to get all of the stats and wherever going to come from some random clickbait farm. And they're not real listeners. And it just doesn't do anything for you. And it just skews your numbers effectively. So no, I wouldn't pay for promotion. There's a way that we launched, as I say, there's a 14-day promo process that we take all of our clients through. When people follow that to the letter, it works. If they don't follow it to the letter, their launches don't work as well. So that's the process, though, when you effectively warm up the audience in advance. But yeah, I wouldn't be paying to promote. If you've already got a big audience, by the way, if you've got Facebook following or an Instagram following, you could do like a Facebook ad to your existing audience, or you could do like a retargeting ad to your existing audience. If you've got a mailing list, you can mail out your existing audience. But if you're talking about paying to get new listeners via one of these like click farms, I just think it's a waste of time, frankly. Emma P, is there a way to network with other podcast creators in the UK, preferably in the North? Yes, there is actually, Emma. I can't think of the flipping name of it, but there is actually one in Manchester, which is for podcasters. Put in, they've got a meetup page, but yeah, put in podcast meetup Manchester and that will pop up, Emma. There's a really, really good one. Oh, I need to add it then. MIC Manchester, I think it's called. Check it out though. 5 more minutes, everybody. Oh, I've been told off. Blimey, there you go. 5 more minutes. Keep going. Yeah, Paul Savage, just keep going. Do you think it's important to have a mic first? We've already had that one. Will there be a recording of this? Yes, there's gonna be a recording of it. Right, I think we've got through pretty much everybody. Right, again, guys, super grateful for your time. I realized that I talk far too fast. My mum and dad used to tell me off that all the time, as did the teachers in school, but I never listened to anybody, frankly, so who cares? I've got a website, phonic.media. If you want the gear guide, just find me online. I'm James Burt, B-U-R-T-T. It's a weird spelling, so you can normally find me, James Burt, B-U-R-T-T. And just if you want the gear guide or if you need any more information, just slide into my DMs in a non-creepy way. Just pop me a DM and we will go from there. But other than that, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. Sorry, we ran 15 minutes over. If you're watching on the replay, you can still get in contact with me as well. And yeah, thanks for being here. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, Wednesday. Don't know what day it is. Have a great rest of your day. Either way. Cheers, guys.